"You're the reason this family's broken," my sister snapped. My dad added, "Things were better before you came back." I didn't argue, just proceeded out. That morning, I severed ties with them all. By evening, 23 missed calls and 1 voicemail changed everything. I, 29M, never thought a single day could rewrite the entire narrative of my life. But last Tuesday proved me wrong in the most brutal way possible. The morning started like any other family gathering at Dad's house. Tense, awkward, and filled with the kind of passive-aggressive energy that could power a small city. I'd been back in town for 6 months after finishing my MBA, trying to rebuild relationships that had been strained since Mom died 3 years ago. My sister had made it clear from day one that my return wasn't welcome, but I kept pushing, kept trying to be the bigger person. That morning, I walked into what I thought was a casual family breakfast. Instead, I found myself in the middle of an intervention that nobody had bothered to warn me about. My sister sat at the kitchen table with her arms crossed, that familiar look of disgust painted across her face. Dad stood by the window, unable to make eye contact. My uncle and his wife occupied the couch, suddenly finding their coffee cups fascinating. The accusation hit me like a freight train. My sister's voice cut through the morning air with surgical precision, telling me I was the reason this family was broken. She'd been building up to this moment for months, collecting grievances like trading cards. According to her, I was selfish for leaving town after high school, selfish for not visiting enough when Mom was sick, and somehow selfish for coming back and trying to make amends. Dad's words came next, each syllable landing like a physical blow. He told me things were better before I came back, that my presence was making everyone uncomfortable, that maybe I should consider moving away again. The man who used to teach me how to throw a baseball and fix car engines was asking me to disappear from his life. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even try to explain that I'd been sending money home every month for the past 2 years, or that I'd turned down 3 job offers in other cities specifically to be closer to family. I just grabbed my jacket and walked out, leaving behind 29 years of memories and relationships that apparently meant nothing to anyone but me. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of rage and heartbreak. I made exactly 3 phone calls that morning. The first was to my lawyer, the second to my bank, and the third to the private investigator I'd hired 6 months earlier for completely different reasons. See, what my family didn't know was that I'd been quietly investigating some financial irregularities I'd noticed in Mom's estate. Nothing dramatic, just some missing money and forged signatures that didn't quite add up. I'd originally planned to handle everything quietly, maybe have a private conversation with Dad about getting professional help if he was struggling with gambling or something similar. But their little intervention had changed my priorities entirely. By noon, I'd initiated the process to freeze all accounts connected to the family trust that Mom had left behind. By 2 p.m., I'd filed formal complaints with the State Attorney General's office regarding financial elder abuse and estate fraud. By 4 p.m., I'd submitted my resignation from the family business that I'd been helping to run since returning home. I turned off my phone around 3 and spent the afternoon at the gym, working out 6 months of frustration and disappointment on a punching bag that didn't judge me or tell me I was the problem. When I finally turned my phone back on around 7 p.m., 23 missed calls and 1 voicemail were waiting for me. The voicemail was from my sister, and her tone was completely different from that morning. Gone was the righteous anger, replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like panic. She asked me to call back immediately, said there was a family emergency, said she was sorry about earlier, and that everyone was worried about me. I didn't call back. Instead, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and waited. The knock on my door came at 8:30. Dad stood in my hallway looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past 12 hours. He asked if we could talk, and I let him in, curious to see how this would play out. He told me about the phone calls they'd been receiving all afternoon. Apparently, freezing the trust accounts had triggered automatic notifications to all beneficiaries, and the Attorney General's office had already reached out for preliminary interviews. My uncle had spent the afternoon frantically calling lawyers, and my sister had been crying in the bathroom for 2 hours. Dad wanted to know what I'd done and why, so I told him. I explained about the missing $47,000 from Mom's life insurance payout, money that was supposed to go toward her final medical bills, but had somehow vanished into Dad's personal account and then disappeared entirely. I told him about the forged signatures on the estate documents, signatures that transferred sole ownership of Mom's antique collection to my sister despite the will clearly stating those items should be divided equally among all children. I showed him the bank statements I'd obtained, the documentation of cash withdrawals that coincided perfectly with my uncle's weekend trips to Atlantic City, and the property deed transfers that had somehow moved ownership of Mom's house entirely into Dad's name, bypassing the trust structure that was supposed to protect all of us. Dad's face went through about 15 different expressions as I laid out 6 months of investigation results. Denial, anger, confusion, and finally something that looked like resignation mixed with shame. He tried to explain that things had been financially tight after Mom's death, that the medical bills were overwhelming, that my sister needed help with her mortgage payments. He insisted they were planning to pay everything back, that it was just temporary borrowing from money that would eventually come to the family anyway. I asked him about my share of the inheritance, the portion that should have helped me pay off student loans and maybe put a down payment on a house. He couldn't meet my eyes when he admitted that money was gone too, used to cover debts and expenses that nobody had bothered to discuss with me. That's when the real revelation came out. My sister hadn't just been angry about my return because of old family drama. She'd been terrified that I'd discover what they'd been doing with Mom's estate. Every argument, every attempt to make me feel unwelcome, every suggestion that I should move away again, it was all designed to keep me from looking too closely at the family finances. Dad asked what it would take to make this go away, what I wanted from them to drop the investigation and the legal complaints. His assumption that this was all some elaborate negotiation tactic made me laugh, and not in a good way. I told him I didn't want anything from them anymore. The money was gone, the trust was broken, and the family relationships I'd been trying so hard to rebuild were clearly built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. I explained that the legal process would continue regardless of what I wanted, because financial crimes against estates aren't just civil matters, they're criminal ones. He left around 10 p.m., looking defeated and older than I'd ever seen him. I felt a moment of sympathy, remembering the man who used to read me bedtime stories and teach me how to change oil. Then I remembered the look on his face that morning when he told me things were better before I came back, and the sympathy evaporated. Update 1. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of legal meetings, police interviews, and phone calls I didn't answer. My sister showed up at my workplace twice, trying to corner me into conversations I had no interest in having. She alternated between tearful apologies and angry accusations, apparently unable to decide whether I was a victim they'd wronged or a vindictive son trying to destroy his own family. The Attorney General's office moved faster than I'd expected. Within a week, they'd frozen all assets connected to Mom's estate and launched a full investigation into the financial irregularities I'd reported. My uncle hired a criminal defense attorney, and my sister started seeing a therapist to deal with what she called the stress of false accusations. The family business became untenable almost immediately. Clients started asking questions about the investigation, vendors wanted payment up front instead of on terms, and the atmosphere in the office became toxic. I'd already submitted my resignation, but Dad asked me to stay long enough to help transition my responsibilities. I agreed, but only because leaving immediately would have hurt the employees who had nothing to do with the family drama. 2 weeks after the intervention that started everything, I got a call from Mom's best friend, a woman I'd known since childhood but hadn't spoken to in years. She asked if we could meet for coffee, said she had some things to tell me about the months before Mom died. What she revealed changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. According to her, Mom had been worried about Dad's gambling problem for over a year before her death. She'd confided that money was disappearing from their accounts, that Dad was taking cash advances on credit cards, and that she was afraid they'd lose the house. Mom had been planning to separate their finances and possibly file for divorce, but the cancer diagnosis had put everything on hold. More importantly, Mom had apparently been planning to change her will in the weeks before she died. She'd made an appointment with a lawyer to remove my sister and uncle as beneficiaries after discovering they'd been encouraging Dad's gambling habits and even covering for him when creditors called the house. The will that we'd all been operating under, the one that divided everything equally among family members, wasn't the will Mom had intended to leave behind. She died before she could make the changes, but she'd told her best friend about her plans in detail. This information changed the entire legal landscape. What I'd thought was opportunistic theft after Mom's death was actually part of a longer pattern of financial abuse that had been happening while she was alive. The Attorney General's office was very interested in this new information, and suddenly the investigation expanded to include potential elder abuse charges. Update 2. The truth about Mom's final months came out piece by piece over the following weeks. Medical records showed that her pain medication had been filled early multiple times, consistent with someone else taking pills and forcing her to suffer unnecessarily. Financial records revealed a pattern of large cash withdrawals that coincided with her worst pain days, suggesting that Dad had been trading her medication for gambling money. My sister's role became clearer too. She hadn't just been enabling Dad's gambling. She'd been actively participating in the financial abuse. Bank records showed that she'd been present for most of the large withdrawals and had co-signed several of the fraudulent documents. Her tears and apologies suddenly seemed a lot less genuine. The criminal charges came down like a hammer. Dad was arrested on charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and prescription drug diversion. My sister faced charges for conspiracy and fraud. My uncle got hit with money laundering charges related to his casino activities with the stolen funds. The family that had told me I was the reason everything was broken was now literally broken, scattered across 3 different criminal cases, and about to lose everything they'd stolen from Mom's estate. I testified at Dad's preliminary hearing, describing what I'd observed during my visits home and what I'd discovered during my investigation. Sitting in that courtroom, looking at the man who raised me now wearing an orange jumpsuit, I felt a complex mix of emotions that I'm still processing. The judge denied bail for all 3 defendants, citing flight risk and the ongoing nature of the financial crimes. Dad's house, Mom's house, was seized as part of the asset forfeiture process. My sister's kids were staying with their father, who was apparently as shocked as everyone else about what had been happening. Update 3. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my new apartment 3 states away. I took a job offer that I'd turned down earlier, finally accepting that there was nothing left for me in my hometown except painful memories and legal proceedings. Dad pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He got 8 years and will be eligible for parole in 5. His lawyer read a statement at sentencing where he apologized to me specifically, acknowledging that he'd failed as a father and betrayed the trust Mom had placed in him. I wasn't there to hear it. I'd said everything I needed to say during my victim impact statement. My sister went to trial and lost spectacularly. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict her on all counts. She got 6 years, with the possibility of parole in 3 if she makes full restitution to the estate. Her final message to me was delivered through her lawyer, asking if I would consider letting her kids visit me once she gets out of prison. I'm still thinking about that one. My uncle took a plea deal that included cooperation with federal authorities investigating the casino money laundering operation he'd been part of. Turns out, stealing from Mom's estate was just the tip of the iceberg for him. He's looking at 15 years in federal prison. The estate recovery process took nearly a year, but I eventually recovered about 60% of what had been stolen. The rest was gone, spent on gambling debts and living expenses that none of them could afford. It's not about the money anymore, though. It never really was. I've been seeing a therapist to work through the complex grief of losing my family twice. Once when Mom died, and again when I discovered who they really were. She's helped me understand that protecting myself from further harm isn't the same thing as being vindictive, and that choosing to rebuild my life somewhere else isn't running away from problems, it's running toward solutions. Sometimes I wonder if I could have handled things differently, maybe tried to work within the family to address the problems instead of immediately involving law enforcement. Then I remember Mom's pain medication being stolen while she was dying, and I know I made the right choice. The 23 missed calls and that panicked voicemail weren't because my family suddenly realized they loved me. They were because they realized I'd figured out what they'd been doing and that the consequences were finally catching up with them. The family that told me I was the reason everything was broken was actually broken long before I came back to town. I just refused to pretend otherwise. I'm building a new life now, surrounded by people who don't see my presence as a threat to their crimes or a reminder of their failures. It's quieter here, more honest, and infinitely more peaceful than the chaos I left behind. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or dramatic. Sometimes it's just refusing to be a victim and choosing to tell the truth, No matter how much it hurts or how many relationships it destroys. The family I thought I was fighting to save was already gone. I just finally stopped pretending it still existed.